This is Right to Life Radio, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
The fight on abortion has shifted, not entirely, but largely from the courthouses to the state houses. And we have some very interesting developments happening throughout the country with abortion, including a major pro-life victory in Kentucky, a major threat to life coming out of Ohio, new legislation coming out in California. And here to cover all of it with me, the man, the legend. He's been on this show on and off, well, off and off only because he's jet-setting around the country, Mr. Jonathan Keller.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Jonathan Keller, who has recently taken pictures with Ron DeSantis.
That's right.
Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg while you were traveling. So
That's
there
right.
you go. So
yeah, we were both in the
you're like, hey, you're the secretary of this.
That San Francisco airport, the transportation.
Yeah.
I was transporting, or I
Yeah.
was being transported.
You know, Mayor Pete's a bit in my good graces after he decided not to give any money to the California High-Speed Rail project. But that's a different topic for an entirely different show.
I actually would love to hear about that sometime. That's good.
Well, that's a $1.2 billion grant they didn't get.
Woohoo.
So there we go. Anyway. I'm not sure to be woohoo or not because will it ever get built? Anyway,
look on the bright side, John. If it doesn't get built, then if the train doesn't get built, it can't derail and
that's true.
spew toxic chemicals into the air.
Yeah, maybe this is the wrong week to say I'm feeling good about Mayor Pete. All right, well, moving right along. There's a bunch of different pro-life stuff going on. We talked last week a little bit about some of the new pro-choice legislation being introduced in California. There are two different bills relating to pro-life pregnancy centers. I'm going to start, though, in Kentucky. Major pro-life victory in Kentucky. Ed Whalen from National Review writing about this. In an important decision today, Cameron versus EMW Women's Surgical Center, the Kentucky Supreme Court has ruled by a vote of 4-3 that the abortion clinics challenging two Kentucky laws against abortion did not have third-party standing to present their patients' constitutional claims against the laws. As to the claims that the abortion clinics could assert on their own behalf, first-party standing against one of the laws, the court ruled that those claims did not warrant the trial court's grant of injunctive relief. All right, so what's going on here? What the heck does any of that mean? What does the phrase third-party standing mean? It's a bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo.
Yeah, it sounds like you need an attorney to decipher all these.
Aren't you guys lucky?
A paterfamilias to decipher all these Latin words.
The damn paterfamilias.
That was for Julia, who doesn't usually listen to the show, but Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was one of her favorite movies.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. I join you as someone whose wife does not always listen to his own radio show. So what does third-party standing mean? What does any of this mean? All right. A point that has long annoyed legal conservatives and pro-lifers and conservative legal pro-lifers, as the two circles of that Venn diagram overlap each other, I guess, and I guess I'm in there, has been the question about abortion clinics filing lawsuits to challenge abortion laws.
Mm-hmm.
All right? And it's because of this thing called standing. All right? In America, you have to have standing in order to sue somebody. You have to show that you have to prove to the judge that you have actually some business being in the courtroom filing a lawsuit. So, for example, if someone drove a car into Jonathan's house and smashed into his living room,
yes,
I would be upset for Jonathan. I would feel badly for Jonathan. But I couldn't sue on Jonathan's behalf. If I tried to file a lawsuit, Girardi versus, let's say, Mr. Smith crashed his car into Jonathan's house. If it was Girardi v. Smith and the judge says, all right, Mr. Girardi, what are you doing here? I would say, well, my friend just got his house smashed. The judge would ask, well, did you get impacted at all? I said, yeah, it made me really upset.
That's right.
And he would say, yeah, being upset doesn't cut it, buddy. You need to show that you have standing to sue, that were your rights violated? Did you suffer some kind of loss, either economic or otherwise?
Whereas I would be literally standing in the midst of my destroyed house.
Your destroyed house, yes.
And I would be saying, yes, my standing as the owner, as the occupant, as the...
Right, as the person who got run into by a car. Yeah. So Jonathan would have standing to sue. I would not. Now, there are some instances in which a court will recognize that a third party has standing to sue in the context of a given lawsuit, right? And the rules for this are, they're very tightly construed, okay? So it would have to be someone who's in such a disadvantaged position as to not be able to vindicate their own rights. It would have to be someone who has a very reasonable, tight connection to the impacted party. So let me look up some good classic examples of third-party standing. So basically, though, the general rule is you have to be the person who is impacted by a law who in order for you to sue. So if you have interchangeable economic interests with the injured party. So let's say a bookseller is suing to enforce the rights of his patrons to purchase a particular book from his store or something like that. So that would be an example of third-party standing, all right? Now, in the context of abortion laws, very often states will pass a law to limit abortion in some way, and the person suing will not be an individual woman seeking an abortion. The person suing will be Planned Parenthood or NARAL, or usually it's going to be an abortion provider. Okay, usually it's some clinic like Planned Parenthood who is suing. Okay, and this has happened time and time and time again throughout the last 50 years of the post Roe v. Wade era. Planned Parenthood versus Casey was Planned Parenthood of I think it was Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania or Planned Parenthood of Southwest Pennsylvania or something. Yeah. Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania versus Casey. So Planned Parenthood, the actual abortion provider, was suing Bob Casey, the governor of Pennsylvania, for a variety of abortion restrictions he passed. And a lot of people have raised the objection, well, why would an abortion clinic have third-party standing? And the issue was never really examined, I think, very carefully and very closely. If anything, it was almost completely overlooked time and time again. Recently, several members of the Supreme Court, including in particular, I believe, Justice Thomas, have ruled that, no, I don't think abortion clinics actually have third-party standing to sue on behalf of women. So the right to abortion, insofar as any right existed to abortion, the right to abortion has always been held to adhere not to clinics, but to women, to people. Okay, it's not that a business has a right to perform abortions. It's that women have the right to get abortions. And I think a lot of the traditional doctrines surrounding third-party standing have been fudged. This is a thing that a lot of legal commentators have called the abortion distortion. So often in lawsuits discussing abortion, normal rules of play wind up getting thrown out.
The infamous abortion distortion.
I literally just said that, Jonathan.
Yes,
way to listen.
I know.
Way to listen carefully to the show.
I just want to make sure that it's. No, that's right. Sorry. This is what happens when I'm trying to type while you're talking.
So this is the problem with how basically so it's this kind of thing where Justice Breyer, for example, he starts questioning and second-guessing these states who had passed laws regulating abortion clinics, saying that they had to be built according to, this particular building code standard. And Justice Breyer all of a sudden decides that the U.S. Supreme Court needs to be basically the abortion clinic regulatory board. If abortion is just a normal medical procedure, then there's no reason why any individual regulation on abortion needs to be examined by the highest court in the land. And you have Justice Breyer saying, oh, this just doesn't seem like the kind of thing that needs regulation. A guy who never saw an industry he didn't think should not be regulated. And so this hypocrisy winds up coming about that all of a sudden normal rules of play get thrown out when it comes to abortion, that abortion is almost this law unto itself where normal rules get thrown out. So what's happened in Kentucky is basically its state Supreme Court has said, listen, you abortion clinics, you're not allowed to sue on behalf of the alleged abortion rights that women possess. Okay, you're not allowed to sue. You don't actually, it's not like these women cannot sue. They can. All right, Roe v. Wade shows us that they can.
Literally.
Okay? Literally. Jane Roe
and John
McCorvey did
I have to
sue.
say, the huge irony of that is here you have the abortion clinics pointing out the fact that they are intervening on behalf of women who are ostensibly needing, quote unquote, abortions. Mm-hmm. When the entire Roe v. Wade case was decided by a woman who wanted an abortion but never actually got one.
Never actually got it. Yeah, right, exactly. And it's also a thing of, this is someone profiting off of these women getting abortions. Are their interests actually perfectly aligned with the women seeking abortions? Well, they have a vested interest in them, a money interest in them getting abortions. So the idea of just glibly giving abortion clinics third-party standing to sue has always been, I feel like it's always just been a thing that's been under-argued, and it's gotten more attention recently. So this Kentucky Supreme Court decision, I think, is a really positive thing. I think it could point the way for other state Supreme Courts around the country, and I think it's kind of taking its lead from some concurring decisions and Supreme Court opinions written. I think Clarence Thomas had some like this. I think maybe Gorsuch did too. I'm trying to recall, but this could be a really positive thing if more and more state Supreme Courts, because now the legal battles have shifted. Now that the Supreme Court has said, we're dusting our hands of this, we're not going to, there is no right to abortion in the U.S. Constitution. So therefore, states can pass their own laws. Well, now what's happening is individual states are saying our state constitution protects some kind of right to abortion. And now a lot of this litigation is happening in the state Supreme Courts. Now, when we return, we're going to go going back to the Midwest, from Kentucky to neighboring Ohio, where we're going to discuss the possibility of the massively far to one side and far to the other abortion dynamics in Ohio, possibility of a pro-choice ballot initiative out there, just as another taste of the kinds of battles we're seeing around the country. This is Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 AM 1400, a production of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. We'll be right back. Back with Right to Life Radio. We're going around the country hearing about different kinds of abortion news. We heard about the good news out of Kentucky about a really good state Supreme Court case saying, hey, abortion clinics, you don't actually have the standing to sue in favor of some alleged right to abortion because you're not the ones actually having abortions. You're just doing them, and that's a different kind of thing. Now we're going to Ohio. So, Jonathan, you're a bit more in touch with this. Your counterpart in Ohio,
yes,
Aaron Baer, is sort of very deep tied within Ohio state politics,
yes,
and is sort of raising the red flag about a ballot initiative coming to Ohio this November.
Well, and we saw this obviously last year. There were 3 states that tragically had pro-life ballot initiatives. Speaking of Kentucky, Kentucky was one of those states. Kansas was another state, and Montana was another state. So 3 kind of traditionally red-ish states that had, at least you would think on paper they would be pro-life. If people mention those 3 states, you would think they would be reasonably pro-life.
Yeah.
All 3 of those pro-life ballot initiatives failed, sadly. And on the flip side, you also had 3 states, Michigan, Vermont, and California, that had very bad, aggressive pro-abortion amendments that passed.
That all passed, yeah.
And somewhat overwhelmingly, John, I don't know if we've talked about this on the show, but I've said this a couple of times. I said it locally here in Fresno at Campus Bible Church when I was there speaking a couple weeks ago. I don't know if because it takes California so freaking long to count all their ballot numbers. Yeah. I had not gone back and seen the final numbers.
Yeah, well, I feel like it was like 66 to 33.
66 to 33.
Right.
But the reason that's significant, John, for those listening at home, is that is 8 points better than Governor Gavin Newsom did on the ballot.
wait, worse for us or worse than Newsom or better than Newsom?
It is better for the abortion side.
Gavin Newsom only got 58% of the vote.
He got 59 to 41 in his fight against Brian Dahle.
And Prop 1 got
66 point something. So roughly 67.
That is rough.
That means that roughly, and it's impossible to get these exact numbers, but that means roughly just in the state of California, abortion, just pure abortion on the ballot. Take away the red and the blue, the R and the D, the fact that Newsom is not a terribly popular governor in a lot of ways.
Abortion's the most popular thing in California.
Abortion, literally, Prop 1, I think, got the highest yes percentage of anything on the ballot this year.
Well, great. So we're doing super awesome then is what we're saying.
And
so yeah.
So the reason I bring that up is that if you are Planned Parenthood, or in this case, in the case of Ohio, if you are Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom or Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights, if you're one of these two groups that are, of course, being funded and shepherded by all these national crazy hard left pro-abortion groups, you're going to look at that and say, well, golly gee, our best ticket to electoral success is to put these ballot initiatives on the ballot because we're going to, I mean, why even bother with legislation when we can just overwhelmingly get these big wins at the ballot box? And it's interesting, John, because this is kind of, I want to be careful how I talk about this because I realize Right to Life Central California only takes positions on the pro-life issue.
Yep.
But as a matter of history,
yeah, sure.
This is a very kind of strangely mirror image strategy to what Karl Rove and other conservative policymakers tried in the 2003-2004 election cycle.
Right, where there were a bunch of, in 2004, there were all these different ballot initiatives in state after state to define marriage as being between one man and one woman. And a lot of people credited George W. Bush's victory in 2004 to a lot of those state ballot initiatives that were very popular and that spurred, Republican turnout.
Especially, ironically, in the state of Ohio.
There you go. So.
He won by, I think, only like 150,000 votes in the state of Ohio, which then, I mean, Ohio was an actual, true blue swing state.
Yeah.
So in this case, essentially what is happening is you're seeing this very interesting strategy. And the press release from
this is abortion ballot initiatives intended to drive Democrat turnout, as opposed to the marriage amendments in 2004 that were intended to drive Republican turnout.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's a very shrewd electoral strategy of seeing, okay, what can we do to goose the votes from our core base constituency and get them to be interested. I mean, obviously, in this case, it's interesting the fact that they've decided to put it on the 2023 ballot. I think that they may look at it in Ohio. The fact that
Ohio's become so red that maybe you want to do that in an off-year, off-year election,
a non-presidential election,
right? Where maybe the turnout is lower overall, and the urgency of abortion maybe to Democrat voters could urge them to come out.
Right.
I mean, it's actually very interesting. So Ohio has passed actually very restrictive abortion laws, which is great.
6 weeks.
They had a heartbeat ban. They had a heartbeat ban, which I believe they passed in like 2018. So they have a heartbeat ban, and Ohio has become more and more, not to say Republicanism and pro-lifeism is, 100% the same, but Ohio has been getting more and more and more conservative and has been voting for Republicans, at least, in greater and greater numbers. Their state legislature has very aggressively pursued pro-life legislation. So I guess I'm wondering how this could turn if this ballot initiative to legalize abortion. And it's one of the things that, kind of makes me nervous. Maybe we'll discuss this in the next segment. One of the things that makes me nervous about the future of the United States in a abortion state versus non-abortion state dynamic, where you're going to have some states where abortion's totally legal, bordering some states where abortion is heavily restricted. So we're going to discuss that dynamic next. This is Right to Life Radio on Power Talk. I want to talk about kind of a big picture abortion question, Jonathan. So I actually did a segment on this earlier in the week on John Girardi's show, and it's about, is America going to fight a civil war over abortion? Now, that's a little dramatic. And I don't think we're going to fight a civil war because I think Americans are too unhealthy to actually fight a civil war. So,
Harsh, but probably true.
People are too. Yeah, this is not going to happen. Yeah. So I don't actually think people are going to fight a civil war. But there is this dynamic that we're seeing. And you can see this in Ohio, where Ohio right now has very restrictive abortion laws. Mm-hmm. They have a ballot initiative, though, that could completely flip it. And you could see a state like Ohio going from, in the Roe era, very permissive abortion laws to very restrictive abortion laws, back to very permissive abortion laws.
It's weird whiplash.
Thereby recalling the Michael Scott.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I knew you were thinking about it as soon as I was going like this and this. The Michael Scott vasectomy joke from The Office. Where
snip, snap, snip, snap.
Snip, snap. Going back and forth, snip, snap. But you can see this radical going back and forth based on just who happens to be in power, who happens to win an election, who happens to win a popular vote. And it's part of this broader dynamic that we're seeing throughout the country where there's this big tension. Obviously, I prefer a situation where each individual state can make its own abortion laws over the whole country being forced into the same terrible regime of abortion law.
Sure.
That's obviously preferable. Thousands of lives will be saved because Texas is outlawing abortion and Ohio is limiting abortion and Georgia is limiting abortion in this country, this state, and this state, and this state. But it does set up, I think, some very uncomfortable dynamics in American politics. So a couple of things to think about. Let's just look at different states that are bordering each other, okay? Let's go along, I think it's I-80, all right? So if you're traveling on Interstate 80, you're going from... is it 80 or 90? I can't remember. Anyway, you could very easily travel from Illinois to Indiana to Ohio to Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. All right, that's a pretty straight shot there, going east to west. Okay, so let's say let's go west to east. Let's start in Indiana and move east. Indiana has very restrictive abortion laws. Indiana's not allowing legal abortion in all these different ways. You then, although their state judges have been sort of going back and forth. So at a certain point, it's not okay, and at some point it is okay, and their judges have gone back and forth. Then you cross the Indiana border to Illinois, or no, I got my geography all backwards. All right. So you start in Illinois. That's where you're starting. Okay, so you start in Illinois. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Sorry. Okay. You start in Illinois. Illinois, very
deep. It's all
deep
flyover country to me. So
yeah, exactly. Illinois, very deep blue state.
Right.
Abortion is totally legal. All 9 months of pregnancy, any reason, essentially. You then cross into Indiana. Abortion heavily restricted, although at some point a state judge might say yes, at some point a judge might say no. The stuff is getting duked out in the courts. You go to Ohio. Ohio has a 6-week abortion ban. Abortion heavily restricted, but they might have this ballot initiative to make it non-restrictive. Then you go to Pennsylvania. Abortion, very legally permissive, very legally available. So you could have someone who lives in Indiana drive across the border to Illinois to get abortions. Throughout this whole region, though, you've got the federal government. And the federal, what is the federal government's attitude towards abortion? So the federal government has taken a very pro-choice attitude towards abortion, where the Biden administration is trying to find ways to allow people who maybe live in Ohio or live in Illinois to travel to Pennsylvania, or someone who lives in Indiana or Ohio, allow them to travel to Illinois or travel to Pennsylvania so they can get abortions there. They want to ship abortion pills through the mail, even though that would not be legal in, let's say, Indiana or Ohio. They want to do so. You've got the federal government pushing certain things. The federal government right now, okay? If Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump get elected president in 2024, then the federal government will stop pursuing those kinds of goals and start pursuing the exact opposite kinds of goals. Maybe a DeSantis administration would push the FDA to regulate the abortion bill. Maybe they would put Restrictions on the U.S. Postal Service may not send abortion pills through the mail, given its disputed legal status, state after state. Blah 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 blah. Like there are all kinds of different postures that the federal government can take depending on who is sitting in the White House.
Right.
And so all this to say, we're setting up this awkward legal situation that I think is, I don't think there's been anything quite like it since
slavery.
Since slavery.
Well, and it's interesting, John, because a lot of times you hear people today, especially I think some progressives or liberals today, especially younger people, like high school students or college students, that just go, I just don't understand how in the world we ever could have gotten to a situation like we had in the 1840s and 50s and this crisis of nullification and everything else, and how could it be that people just didn't understand, and how could the anti-slavery people just tolerate this injustice happening right across the border? And it's like,
right.
Well,
yeah, and we slam Stephen Douglas in the Lincoln Douglas debates for sort of saying let every state decide for itself, which is essentially the sort of moderate conservative position. Just let every state decide for itself. It's essentially the Stephen Douglas position on slavery. Beyond even that, there are also parallels in the sense of interstate criminal law enforcement. So there was the big issue. If a slave escapes from your plantation in the South and goes to the North, should the northern state be forced to, send the slave back? Fugitive slave laws, this was a huge issue. We're dealing with the same thing now. Okay, California is passing legislation basically to say, hey, if you perform an illegal abortion in Texas and you flee to California, we're not going to hand you over to the Texas authorities. Okay, and California is basically saying, look, we'll hand you over to Texas. If you commit a murder in Texas and flee to California, we'll ship you back to Texas. If you knock over a liquor store in Texas and flee to California, we'll send you back to Texas. We're not sending you back to Texas, though, for performing a in Texas illegal abortion.
Right.
So it's setting up, I honestly think it's setting up just a really bizarre situation that's incredibly tense, where I feel like we're getting to a point where people are more willing to say, we're just not going to follow the law. And I mean in this sense. Okay, Jonathan,
Yes.
Hypothetical situation. Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump win the 2024 election. Massive Republican majority in the Senate, massive Republican majority in the House. They pass a federal law outlawing abortion nationwide. Do you think Gavin Newsom is going to obey that law? Do you think Gavin Newsom will allow California to not have legal abortion? Should a federal law come down saying limiting abortion, outlawing abortion after the first trimester or something, will Gavin Newsom obey that law?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I don't think Kathy Hochul in New York would obey it. I don't think Gavin Newsom in California would obey it. And I mean, especially Gavin Newsom, given that he literally he became a nationally noteworthy figure as mayor of San Francisco by breaking the law to give gay marriage licenses out. So I really think we're approaching a kind of something approaching like a constitutional breaking point with all of this.
Can you, John, I mean, I know we are pressed for time, but could you give like the layman's incredibly super brief understanding of the nullification crisis that we all faced in the country faced in the 1850s?
No, not really. Because I didn't really. I would need to brush up on the history of it a little bit more.
I guess at the risk of completely butchering my Civil War history and all the Civil War buffs going like, no, that's not what it was.
Like if I did it, I would screw it up.
The gist of it is, at various times throughout our history, we've had this situation where, oftentimes on racial justice issues, it's been certain states or certain governors that have said, "Oh, I don't
have to follow the federal law. Yeah,
I'm not going to follow it."
Yeah, and it's always just been kind of a tense thing, and it kind of got settled at the Civil War that hey,
you can't do that.
You can't do that. You're not an independent country. You're a region of this one country. You're not your own independent country.
And the funny thing is that on that issue, progressives, our liberal pro-abortion friends would rightly say, "Oh, I can't believe that there was ever a time that you had these people that were so racist that they were willing to defy the federal government."
Right.
Like
Well,
this.
and that's the thing is, if we came to a situation analogous to, the governor of Alabama refusing to follow the Federal Civil Rights Act, refusing to integrate schools, and President Kennedy sending the National Guard into Alabama to enforce it, would that happen in the United States? I don't know. Would that happen in the United States of today, rather? I could definitely see Gavin Newsom defying the law, and I don't know that I could see someone having I don't know that I could see federal officials having the intestinal fortitude to actually stop it. I don't know. I feel like it creates a pretty grave constitutional crisis, and I don't know that Gavin Newsom would necessarily back down if the federal government said you will enforce this. So I think the whole thing sort of makes me wonder. Again, I don't think we're heading to a civil war. Although I guess nobody in 1830 thought we're not going to have a civil war.
Come on.
I don't think we're heading to a civil war.
And even, John, I'll say, I don't even know that the states that seceded actually thought that we were going to have a civil war. They said, surely Lincoln will call his bluff, and there's no way he's actually going to do this.
He's actually going to shoot Americans with American guns. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you don't think it's going to happen, I guess, until it happens. But I don't think there's going to be a civil war. But I feel like, history is kind of the study of things that were completely unpredictable and completely unfeasible. What was completely unpredictable or unfeasible, at one point is completely feasible and happening 30 years later. I mean, history is a bit more variable than people realize. I guess I'm more open to the possibility that a kind of red state, blue state division in this country could happen, that further increased polarization could result because it's not just abortion, really, that we're seeing this divide. I think you're seeing, fundamentally unable to get along viewpoints on a lot of issues.
Yeah.
I think,
but
when it comes to issues like transgenderism, I mean, once each side views the other as engaging in child abuse.
Yep.
I think pro-transgender people view conservatives who don't want children to have gender intervention, procedures or whatever, view them as engaging in child abuse, and conservatives look at liberals who do provide those procedures to minors as engaging in child abuse. So there's no. I feel like there's more and more issues where there's just no common ground between the two sides in America, and abortion being the main one, though.
Yes, and it's very different than should we have a national bank?
Yeah.
Should we have what should the marginal tax rates be on capital gains income?
Right.
I highly doubt that. Anybody from either side of this is going to say, no, it should be 35%. No, it should be 39.3%.
For a 15% capital gains tax.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
No. People are going to say, yeah, I don't like this very much, but I will either move or I will just say, okay, I'll just readjust my portfolio. And it is not to the same degree as, literally
abortion.
life and death.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. All right, when we return, we'll be looking at new California legislation attacking pro-life pregnancy centers. That is next on Right to Life Radio. We've got a bunch of events coming up with Right to Life of Central California. Friday, March 3rd at McLean Hall at Fresno State, we're hosting Autumn Lindsay Hagashi from Students for Life of America. She'll be speaking over at Fresno State. She'll also be speaking during the day at San Joaquin Memorial High School. Very excited to be hosting her. Monday, March 6th, we'll be taking our bus to Sacramento for the California March for Life, hosted by one Mr. Jonathan Keller and California Family Council.
Very excited about that.
And then Thursday, March 30th, we will have Gianna Jessen speaking here in Fresno. She'll be speaking at the St. Paul Catholic Newman Center at Bar Cedar and Barstow. If you want more information about any of those events or to register, go to our website, righttolifeca.org. righttolifeca.org. It's the word two, T-O, not the number two, righttolifeca.org. All right, Jonathan, let's do a quick wrap up here of what's going on in the California State Legislature with regards to pro-life pregnancy centers.
Yes.
They have for a long time been a hated target of the left for trying to sort of help women who choose not to have abortions or help provide them with resources. And
I think, John, you're no. They're hated because they're spreading dangerous and harmful misinformation,
right?
Medical misinformation.
Yeah,
actually,
that's as opposed to every abortion clinic ever that has always described fetuses as, quote, a lump of tissue.
Yes.
So the pro-life pregnancy centers are being targeted. We've got one bill in the state legislature basically saying that providing misinformation, that deceptive advertising on the part of pro-life pregnancy centers could result in lawsuits against them or action from the state. Basically, private lawsuits can be initiated. This bill, what is it, Jonathan? AB 310, is it?
A 315.
315.
Yeah, the first one is 315.
Yeah, Assembly Bill 315, which could initiate, basically it creates what's called a private right of action. This means the right of an individual person to sue. Private right of action for engaging in deceptive advertising about the kinds of services provided. Now, I'm not too worried about this out of Obria, given that I don't think anything we do is deceptive.
Yep.
But I do think this is pretty specifically being targeted against pro-life pregnancy centers, and I think it's a little. I'm not sure what level of deception they mean. There are many liberals who think it's deceptive to say that you're offering women's health care if you're not also offering abortion. I'll note that the Planned Parenthood clinic in Fresno is offering women's health care, but not offering like prenatal care services, which doesn't seem very parenthoody to me or reproductive-y to me. If you're not going to actually help people who want to be parents or want to reproduce, seems a little deceptive. So there's that, and then there's also this. Maybe Jonathan, we can explain this upsetting and stupid thing called spot bills.
Yes.
So there's another spot bill that's been introduced. It has to do with pregnancy resource centers, but given the nature of a spot bill, which Jonathan will explain, it doesn't have any content in it yet.
That's right. And this is a very frustrating thing where technically, John, the bill introduction deadline this year is February 17th. So by the time you are listening to this, the bill deadline has passed. That means no new bills that are introduced. And
in the California legislature.
Yes, everything should be locked in. We should know what everything is. Well, AB 710, the title is Crisis Pregnancy Centers. And this is the abstract for the bill from Pilar Chiavo from Assembly District 40. Abstract. Existing law provides for the licensure and regulation of health facilities, including primary care and specialty clinics, by the State Department of Public Health. This bill, all right, here's the in-depth legislative analysis here.
Yeah.
This bill would state the intent of the legislature to enact legislation relating to crisis pregnancy centers.
That's it.
That's it.
So they want to do something about licensure for crisis pregnancy centers, but they just need to get a bill advanced first, and then they'll just amend it afterwards. So this is the annoying thing, is that we have all these very hard, firm, organized deadlines within the California state legislature, and people do stuff to avoid it. I think the most egregious example is what's called gut and amend, where you take some unimportant piece of legislation that you don't really care about or didn't want to pass, and then very late in the process, after any time has taken place for having legislative hearings about it or fact-finding, you just cross out the entire language of the bill and replace it with something completely different that you know you have the votes to pass and just want to pass. And then there's no public transparency, there's no public accountability, there are no hearings about it. You just pass whatever you want to pass at the 11th hour. So that seems to be what's happening. We're going to be following this really closely this legislative year to see what kinds of bad pro-choice legislation will be introduced this year in the California state legislature. So Jonathan's website, californiafamily.org, is a great place to track that. We'll be tracking it at righttolifeca.org as well. Well, that'll do it, folks. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400.